All right, folks, welcome to class, everyone. So today we are going to continue with our guest speaker series. And today we have two guest speakers. The focus of today's conversation is going to be Chicana and Chicano politics. And so we have a couple folks that are currently holding public office positions to share a little bit about their journey and conversations about what they're working on and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first guest speaker. All right, folks. So our first guest speaker is Carolyn Torres, who is currently the vice president of the Santa Ana Unified School District. She's also a junior high teacher and a member of two grassroots community groups. In 2019, Carolyn won a seat as school board member for Santa Ana Unified School District with a hard-fought, completely grassroots campaign. She taught high school in Los Angeles for 5 years and is currently teaching junior school history in Anaheim. In her new role as a school board member, Carolyn has helped pass the SAUSD Ethnic Studies high school requirement. She has a master's in education in social and cultural analysis of education with an urban emphasis. Carolyn Master's thesis titled Grassroots in Santa Ana, Identity and Conceptualizing Community, centered on the way in which our communities understand our roles as activists and organizers. Carolyn believes the purpose of research in all levels of education is organizing and capacity building. She believes the purpose of critical education is organizing and capacity building. Through Chicanas and Chicanxs Unidxs and Unidxs, Carolyn has organized around issues of police brutality, gentrification, and most notably, fighting gang injunctions. As a member of ARE LA, she believes that teachers play an important role in movement building. As educators of all types, she believes we must truly engage in praxis and utilize our research and credibility as teachers by being actively part of grassroots community-based issues outside of our professions. Carolyn, welcome to our class. And thank you for taking time to come and share your story with us. Basically, yeah, just share your story with us. But I was interested in inviting you to speak to my students, just to maybe share a little bit about what it's like to be a Chicana elected official, why you decided to run for office, and what issues you're currently addressing right now. So I'm going to go ahead and hand over the mic to you, Hermana.
All right, thank you. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. So I have been in office a little over a year. I had to run 2 years in a row in 2019 for a special election, and then again in 2020. And prior to running for office, I was not that involved in electoral politics. In fact, as a grassroots activist and teacher, I was very much skeptical of electoral politics, because we had seen time and time again that it never seemed to work in our favor. Like, we'd have these candidates and these folks who would be somewhat community oriented, so we're like, okay, we'll kind of support them. And then when it came down to the hard issues, they were unwilling to take public stances or even like move things behind the scenes to head in a direction. And so I think that one of the ways I like to ground whenever I talk about like my story is talking about, like, I would have never had run for politics in a city other than Santa Ana. My family's been in Santa Ana since the 1920s, late 1920s, early 1930s. And we've had generations of folks here. Prior to that, we came from Tucson. And at least on my dad's side, my mom's side is less known. But so we had like all this experience in the city of Santa Ana, and my family was heavily involved in like gangs and drugs. My parents were heroin addicts. I wasn't raised by my parents. My dad died when I was little. My mom abandoned me when I was 10. Went to go live with my aunt. And this was like epidemic in most communities, but in Santa Ana in the 80s, especially in Southern California in the 80s, this is just so widespread. And so my family has more of a kinship kind of family. Nobody was raised with their parents. All of my aunts and uncles were struggling, so all of our cousins were raised by that aunt or this grandparent. Some of them were in foster care, some of them, at least one of us got adopted and didn't even know us until adulthood. So we had like all of these like traumas, mental health issues, a lot of depression, suicide, suicide attempts I witnessed as a kid, to various parental figures in my life. So all of this stuff, right? And so when I went, only wanted to graduate high school, only wanted to go to college. And it was when I was in a teenager that I discovered mecha, right? My aunt in the 70s, she would go to a park in Santa Ana and they would equally recruit for mecha and for gangs at the same park. And so you were just there trying to figure out where your life was gonna go, right? And so that was just the kind of how it was. And so she remembered, she never got involved, but she kind of remembered this stuff. And so she had encouraged me to join when I was at a community college / high school program. And that completely changed how I saw my family. I had never been ashamed of my family, even though we had all this struggle, but I just knew that we struggled. That was it. And so when I had this conceptual framework and historical framework of what was happening, I decided that, what was going on with my family was going on with a lot of families, and there were structural things at place, and that kind of set the trajectory for the rest of my life. Still struggled, still messed up in college, still made a bunch of mistakes, but like politically it set my trajectory. So I got involved in a lot of activism. So when I was going to run for school board, I had never intended to run for anything. I was highly opposed to running. But some folks in my organization found out that there was going to be an appointment to the school board. And they were like, well, you're a teacher. Like, you know all this stuff. Like, you understand education. Like, why don't you just run? And at this point, I had known some people that had run for office. We had seen how it mattered when you're pushing for ethnic studies, who sits on the dais, who is a decision maker in these positions, that, we had constantly pushed and advocated. I don't know how many times I made public comment at various school boards in various cities and only kind of been listened to, right? And so it was frustrating. It was frustrating for people who were in elected office to assume that like activists or community folks that were speaking out were like unintelligent or didn't know what was going on. Like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, even though we were all like heavily researched in what we were saying for, what we were pushing for. And so the appointment, I was like, well, it's an appointment. It's not a full campaign. I'll just try. And if I don't get appointed, I don't get appointed. And so they end up being deadlocked between me and another person. And this person had no experience in education, but he was kind of the like established Dem kind of pick. Like, it was assumed he was going to get it. And what turned into just this like appointment process snowballed into this condemnation of the political structures in Santa Ana. Because when there were 2 board members not appointing me, I have a master's in education, been a teacher for a long time, all this experience, like, why would I not be qualified? A brown woman, like, why would I not, like, why would I be less qualified than somebody who had no experience in schools? And so it ended up creating this huge thing where people like started rallying behind me. More people that, community folks that had already worked this were supportive, but other folks just watching like what was happening, like it became this huge thing, pushing back against like moderate Democrats and all these folks who claim to be progressive and all these kinds of things, right? And so it took months, it was drawn out, they were deadlocked. And then eventually I had to go to a special election, and I had to decide, do I really want to do this? Like, this stuff is rough. It's a lot of money. I hate asking people for money. And when you're running for office, like, all you do is ask people for money. I don't, like all of this stuff. And so I went back and forth for a little bit, and then finally I decided to do it. And when I ran, there was no support. I had absolutely no support other than community, the grassroots community, activist community. That's it. Nothing, no money. Normally it costs at minimum $20,000 to run an election, but a healthy election at $40,000 or $50,000. I was only able to raise $10,000. And that's like, it sounds like a lot of money, but it was nothing. It was nothing compared to what people were running. It was $100,000 spent against me. The police put a hit piece on me. There was all this stuff going on. There was a lot of horrible things said about me, that I was inarticulate, that I was violent. I was like all of these kinds of things. But I eventually, through hard work and a grassroots campaign and just knocking on a bunch of doors and just like people power and labor, I was able to win a termed out city council member who had all the name recognition and all the support. And so every time I went for an endorsement and didn't get selected, it actually created more support for me. Didn't get endorsed. And so that was then, right? And then I had to run again. And the power kind of shifted because now I'm an incumbent, now I'm in office. And the folks who were not supportive of me in the beginning are all of a sudden very supportive. And so it kind of changed the trajectory. And it was the first time like a grassroots like activist had been elected in Santa Ana, like a real grassroots activist, not like, you know, a do-gooder kind of community person who has good intentions but doesn't have the critical analysis, like a grassroots activist. And so after I won, and there was someone else that had ran for city council, but he didn't win. And so I was the one that came out. And so it pushed a bunch of other activists to run in 2020. And we were able to get a really awesome person on city council as a result of that. And it kind of changed the landscape of what Santa Ana politics look like, because now like being this moderate Dem wasn't good enough anymore. And so since I've been on the board, one of the first things that we did within a couple months in office was pass the ethnic studies high school requirement, because it had stagnated for 5 years. There was this initial community push about 5 years ago to get a course approved with the intention of like getting the high school requirement later, and it just stalled because folks didn't want to do it. And so once I was in, it pushed, and we're in that process right now. And it's interesting being on the inside of the process, and I can see like now how easy it is for stuff to get watered down or kind of pushed to the side, because the school district is such this big, you know, bureaucratic machine that there's all these things that could happen to take away the true intent of whatever it is you're passing. And as an activist, you're normally like, you get to this point, you win, and you're like, oh, now I can rest. But you can't, because as soon as you rest, they start to take apart whatever you won, right? And so there has to be these plans, these long-term plans. And so that's a difficult position that I'm in, because I'm still an activist, but not in the same way anymore. Now I'm a board member, I'm an elected official. And so the way that I do things and the way that I behave has to change to a different degree. And there's all these different pressures, right? Because everybody wants to assume wants to make it seem like you're theirs. And so it's a strange thing. And you also have to be really careful, because as soon as there's any kind of missteps, people will abandon you like trash, right? And so, except for the community folks that supported you. So that's the position I'm in now, because there's folks that are really upset, and they're trying to take me out, like trying to take me out as this activist person, and launching, you know, these campaigns kind of against me. You know, saying I took money from the district, you know, like just really ridiculous lies, you know, because I've had a hardline stance on the school openings, because Santa Ana's been heavily hit by COVID more than any other place in Orange County, Anaheim as well. But so it's been rough. It's been a rough conversation. And so, you know, it's a lot. There's a lot of pressure. People are just waiting for you to mess up, and waiting for you to do something that it's in a line. And there's a lot of internal things that happen, and as well as external. And, you know, having patience and composure. There's a lot of people that try to bait you and try to get you to do things, and just try to poke your buttons, like just push at you. And you have to be really, really disciplined on what you're going to respond to, how you're going to respond. And so this idea of like a Chicana politician is only part of the story, because there's a lot of folks that might identify as Chicana or Chicano or Chicanxs in office, but they're not necessarily politically oriented in the way that we think that means, right? It's more like a cultural political orientation, less than a critical analysis of like power structures and things like that. So it is interesting. I'm glad though I have folks on the board that are good. I know other folks that get elected into office and they're like the lone voice. That's not my situation. So we're just trying to figure out like how we can move stuff. So ethnic studies is something that we passed, but we're still on top of, and we're looking at a lot of other things in the district, trying to figure out how these systems work, because we understand what the problems are. As an activist or someone who's knowledgeable, you understand what the problems are. You understand what's going on. The difficult thing to pinpoint is where the drop off is. So if you're saying we're going to focus on like restorative justice and restorative practices, and that's like a district-wide thing, but you know that that's not happening in the classroom, because yeah, I'm a teacher, right? So I know whatever's set up here doesn't always get down here. So where exactly is the disconnect? Is it between the district and admin? Is it between the admin and teacher? Is there teacher pushback? Like finding out like where in these system processes, where is it falling off? That's the difficult part. And it's also difficult being in a position of power, because, you know, when you're an activist, people just dismiss you, right? They're just like, whatever, go away. But when you're in someone in power, people just lie to you. So they just tell you what they think you want to hear. So you're trying to figure out like what's real and what's not, because now you're somebody who has positional power in this small setting of a district. And so it's difficult, it's stressful. I'm not trying to romanticize it. It's hard. It's very hard to be in this position. Especially if there's things that you want to push, but you have to like figure out how to push them in a way that has longevity. Because if you push them in a way that gets it done quickly, but then it falls apart, then you might have won something on paper, but you really didn't win anything, right? So it's trying to figure out what stuff can you push immediately, what stuff are you going to have like a bigger plan for, and it gets really, really rough. So that's kind of the struggle that I've been having. I don't really know. I wasn't watching the clock. I could talk about a lot of stuff. So if y'all have questions, that would probably be easier for me to figure out how to answer them, because I got stories for days. So I don't know.
Do you all have any questions or comments so far? Thank you for sharing all that, Carolyn. Yeah, it's rough. It's rough, and like much love to you for holding it down. And I think it's really interesting just how you're sharing like that shift, right? Where you have to go from activist / organizer to this elected official, and like all these things you have to juggle in your mind, right? Because now you're wearing these different hats. So yeah, that's tough.
Legal things, right? There's stuff that like I cannot answer. And I know if I was on the other side of that, I'd be like, what the hell? Tell me the answer, right? And so like that's, it's a weird position to be in. Very weird. And again, I'm only a month and a year and a couple months into this, although it feels like 10 years. So it's just, yeah.
Any questions, folks? Comments?
I was gonna say,
Go for it.
Not that it's about the money, but it sounds like it's a lot of work if you're also a teacher and then doing this board member stuff. So like how do you like juggle both? I guess like that just sounds almost impossible.
It is almost impossible, and I still try to be somewhat involved in the community organizations I'm a part of. Obviously, I've had to take a back seat to those as well, because both of the organizations I'm a part of, Chicanos Unidos and Association for Raza Educators, I was really involved in. And I've had to completely take a back seat because those are like, you know, meeting every week, or we're gonna talk about this, or we're planning this. And it's like, I just literally don't have time. And teaching is a lot. During distance learning has been really stressful. And then the board stuff it's the board meetings, which are a long time, and you have to have like this emotional armor because you get attacked by other folks in the board. And then the other part is if you're trying to like be involved in things, and there's meetings, there's talking to this person, there's talking to that person, there's all of these like communication and relationship buildings that you have to do in the position that take a lot of time. So it is really impossible. Things definitely, there's sacrifices involved, and you have to decide like what you're going to sacrifice and how much of, because you could be a board member who does very little. You could be, or city council, anything. You could just show up to the meetings, not read any of the information, like you get these giant packets, not read anything, just show up, vote based on how you feel on the conversation that happens on the moment, and that's it. And that requires, you know, 2 days a week, 2 days a month or whatever.
Yeah.
Or if you're trying to get involved and move stuff, then it's a lot of work and you have to sacrifice.
I was gonna say, if you want it to be effective, you probably have to put in all the effort.
Yeah, and it's not just the work, it's also being aware of what the public perception is and having to be on like participate in that as well. So you could also opt out of that. You could also be like, I don't care what the public thinks, I'm just going to do what I have to do. But it's important to be aware of what rhetoric is going out there and what misinformation is being spread, because people don't always pay attention unless you're really tuned into a particular topic. You don't know a whole lot about other topics, right? That's true for anything, right? I know a whole lot about teaching history. I don't know a whole lot about, climbing a mountain. So like you have their interest groups, and so the public is the same way. Everyone's the same way. So if you don't know or have any kind of direct knowledge or interest in a part of something that's happening in the school board, then you're just relying on whatever's being spread out there. And there are like a lot of efforts to create misinformation to like discredit, myself and other left-leaning folks in political office.
Yeah. And you know what? It's a typical playbook type of strategy that folks like that try to use, is that they discredit people. Like that's a big one. And it happens a lot. It happens, you all met my partner last week. It happened to him when he was a board member. It happens to a lot of people. And that's one of their, it's a right-wing strategy where they just discredit people left and right. And then they take the focus off the issues and try to make this person like this evil person that everyone should be against, right? And unfortunately, because people aren't looking at it through a critical lens or asking those critical questions, they just start believing that, and it works oftentimes, right? So it's tricky and it's a challenge. I'm going to go ahead and have Bella unmute and go ahead and ask your question, Bella, and then after that, Brittany, if you can unmute and share your comment.
Hi, I'm actually kind of working to push for ethnic studies in Kern County. And I was just wondering, how do you deal with the backlash that you really get once you start to push with ethnic studies? Because I found that even just posting about it, I get people who kind of use that against me, trying to say like, oh, you don't care about like this group of people or stuff like that. How do you deal with that? Well,
one, you got to figure out who, in terms of decision makers, who are your allies. And then two, you have to decide what are going to be your hard lines. Like, what are the things where you're going to be like, yes, we're going to take this stand, and whatever the backlash is, that's the backlash. Like, for example, white supremacy is bad, right? Just the most simple kind of things can be like, oh, do I want to say that? What if people get mad at me for saying that? But it's like, we had already kind of collectively agreed on this as a society a couple decades ago, that generally speaking, this is not something that we are all in favor of. Right. And so, and starting with those premises, because then that gives you like the freedom to build on it, rather than like trying to appease folks who are never going to like ethnic studies and never be in favor of it. You're not worrying about those folks. You're worrying about the folks that are like in the middle, and the folks who maybe just don't know what it is or don't really know like how impactful it can be. And you and whoever you're working with to push for this, you just have to decide what's going to be your hard line and stick to those lines. When we were pushing ethnic studies in Santa Ana, it was more about like the students and knowing each other, and then also we were able to. Because we had the board majority, push it with the board. Well, actually, the whole board voted unanimously, right? When you're trying to do something and you're not in power, then it's about trying to make it either politically safe or like politically unsafe to be for or against ethnic studies. So you, as the organizer, has to create the tone for what the fight is going to be, and the decision makers have to either want to join you in this fight or become your adversaries, and you have to decide like where you're going to go with that. And those decisions are completely localized, right? It depends on the local things that are happening in your community on how how to handle those situations. So I'm sorry I couldn't be more specific, but it's just really focusing on what are your main points that you want to get across, and what are your non-negotiable points when you're pushing for this. Because there is different schools of thought, right? Like that, it should be the most accessible for everybody, or like, no, this is what we want. We need to push it exactly like this with no compromise. And you have to decide which route you're going to go, or if you're going to go somewhere in the middle. Because it is difficult to have those conversations. People buy into a lot of rhetoric that's not true, right? And this kind of colorblind philosophy, and all those kinds of things that are not accurate. When we passed ethnic studies, we really wanted to make sure that it was going to be like an authentic form, because we had seen what had happened in other districts. I had seen like a lot of what happened in other districts. And so I'm sorry if that's not really specific to your question. It's just that you just have to decide what the parameters are for you, and then stick with those and develop a campaign around it.
Thank you so much.
Brittany, go ahead.
Hi, first I want to say thank you for taking the time to speak with our class today. It's really interesting, all the points that you're bringing up. I pretty much have like a two-part question. They're on two different topics that you brought up while you were speaking. I basically said pretty much like, in my opinion, I don't think that the education system takes ethnic studies as seriously as mathematics or science, at least, in the United States. And I think that the quicker that more school boards take it as seriously as those subjects, that's when I think we'll be able to see a more like universal respect for the study. But yeah, so I guess that one was more of like a comment. And then my second question, or pretty much I was going to ask, I would also like to know if we have more moderate Democrats now that claim to be, progressive, but are just as like kind of corrupt and a little bit lazy. I'm not sure if you've heard about what's happening or what happened at Echo Park like a few weeks ago. They relocated a lot of the homeless people, and a lot of protesters were injured and stuff from the police, and the city councilman that ordered all of those things, basically like on his Instagram, he has like, I serve the people, not politics, and like basically stating like, I'm LGBTQ and I'm for the people, and I'm not like all these other, I'm not like all these other politicians. But it just seems like people are more like taking those buzzwords and using them to their advantage. And I was going to ask you if you've had any of that happen since you've been in office.
All the time. All the time. It is not popular to be like a moderate right now. It's popular to be like, woo, progressive, right? And so whether or not they are actually in fact left and or progressive and then left, is really doesn't matter to them. It's like they're gonna use the language, the movement language, in order to justify, right? And that actually is, it's negative, but it also does show the broader picture that there has been a shift, right? And now that shift is not saturated, but at least publicly there's a shift in how we can talk about stuff. And so it's on the community to hold those folks accountable and really complicate when they try to make these general statements that don't have any real meat or value, because that happens all the time. Like the folks who have been like rallying against me are using all of that language, all of it. And so it gets very complicated, especially when you talk about like gentrification and things like that. Folks don't want to admit like the role of like art and the role of other kind of things in gentrification and how complicated it is, and whether locals, inviting locals to be part of gentrification is a win, right? And so like that's those kind of like really hard discussions. And so I think it's just reminding folks of that, and not letting, as much as possible, right, and not letting that language be taken by folks who don't really believe in it. And the only way to really do that, especially for decision makers, is to really call attention to how they're voting and what they're saying, and offer that as a counter to, you know, their rhetorical posts, right? Their rhetoric posts. But yeah, no, we see that a lot. And I mean, I'm in Orange County. You all know that's like the conservative hub. Santana is not. Santana's, you know, has a long activist history, but there still is a conservative leaning to that, because that's just where we're at, right? And so even so there's been shifts, definitely. Like I said, when I got elected, it shifted what kind of, you know, politician folks wanted to elect. But again, it's only been like a year, right? So they're doing everything in their power to like bring it back. So that's where I'm at, and that's the kind of battle that I'm in. The more like broad battle than just, you know, the policy issues at the district level. No, that's a thing. Like that's a huge struggle. Like it's big, because everybody can say the words, right? It's different when you're working on things, and when you're willing to say stuff that is you can get pushback for. So people will say things that sound radical when there's no pushback, right? But it's harder. It's a lot harder when you know that there's going to be pushback by folks.
And I think that brings up a really good point in that if we're not paying attention to what our elected officials are doing, then all kinds of stuff happens right under our noses, right? And we're just like consumed by our daily lives of just trying to get through the day in this capitalistic society, right? We're just trying to get through the day. And that's part of the ills that comes with that kind of structure. And so we do need to be paying attention to what our elected officials are doing, especially our city council and our school board members. We need to be paying attention. And even though it sounds like such a drag and so boring to tune into all the meetings, you know, you got to do it, because it affects our day-to-day lives, you know, and the schooling of our kids and what's going on in our communities. It's all the time. And the more that you do that, the more you become aware and acquainted, and the more you'll be able to read between the lines, the more you'll be able to pick up on BS, the more you'll be able to push back and call them on it. Because if we don't do that, then who's going to hold them accountable?
Yeah, and it's also like the other side of hold on, sorry, I'm like, the other part that's harder, that is not as natural to like an activist as an organizer, is trying to be somewhat supportive of the folks that would want to take a stand, right? There may not be like the activist or organizer who's going to take the stand regardless, right? But they may be willing if they feel like they have some support. Yeah. We often like say, oh, whatever to him, we don't care about them, right? Because, and I said the same thing for years too, who cares, whatever, you know, but the reality is it makes it harder for other folks to have any support in their governing bodies if they're like the lone person. And so you can try to attempt to try to like help some folks out by telling them the community will be supportive or that doing that. At least to give them a shot to do the right thing, right? At least to give them a chance to do it, especially when someone's new to office.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it isn't just about, you know, holding accountable those that are going to do your community wrong, but those that are trying to do good. If they don't hear or know that people are watching and listening and ready to support them, then they're only going to feel that the pressure from the opposition, and that's all they're going to feel. So they're going to be like, I'm alone in this fight. So like, what am I going to do? Right. So that's important too, to pay attention and try to support those that you feel might go towards a more progressive leaning type of decision and just show support and gather support for them as well. It's to say, you know, we're all here to support you. And that's actually what we've been doing as well in Ventura with our city council members, because man, there's just a lot right-wing conservatives, nationalists. There's a lot of really messed up things going on over there. And our city council members, we have 2 women of color on the city council, and oftentimes they're alone, you know, but we have to gather the community and say, hey, we're here to support you, we got you. And then they're able to feel more confident in those decisions to move forward, because they know that they're going to get a lot of pushback from the conservatives in Ventura County. So that's an excellent point, Carolyn. So make sure that you all are paying attention to that. I do have a question for you. You were talking about how the district might push for policies, resolutions, et cetera, such as restorative justice and ethnic studies. But oftentimes those things don't get implemented in the classroom. Like, do you have any ideas, or have you suggested anything to the board as far as like what you all can do or what the school district can do to see if folks are doing what they need to be doing in the classroom? Any accountability measures?
Well, I think there's, there has to be kind of a whole reboot is what my analysis is. That whenever something, a direction is pushed by the district, like we have to have the administrators involved, the upper level district folks, the principals ready to go, building support within the teacher ranks, and then, you know, having, you know, principal evaluations and teacher evaluations and all these other entities involved in making sure that it happens. Because we know how it is, right? The schools end up just doing what the schools are going to do, because they're like a little city, right? And so they're going to do whatever they're going to do. And if the district is not paying attention, they may, and that's a good and bad, right? Sometimes really good stuff is happening in isolation, and sometimes like horrible things are happening in isolation. So I think it's just, it's figuring out and being consistent with the messaging. I think when you have a school board that's divided, or when there's like political egos involved, people also don't know what to do. It creates stagnation, because folks don't want to make this person mad versus this person mad. And so things don't move. And then it just stays until the next election. And that's something I'm really looking at now. Like, there's all these great intentions, but the staff sometimes doesn't know what to do, because there's these, especially in a town like Santa Ana, which is a big city, but acts like a small town where everybody knows everybody. And there's all these ties and relationships, right? So it's really complex. And sometimes I just kind of sit there and I just think about like how, like what all the stuff that's going on. So I'm still in the process of figuring that out. We're trying to figure out how to, because we did do restorative justice and it was implemented, but it didn't saturate, like there's no saturation of it. It ends up being like the teachers who are about it will take it on, and that's kind of it, right? So yeah, ethnic studies, we're not trying to do that. We're really, we passed the model that it was, you can take a singular ethnic studies course, or you can take a course that's layered, like US history, ethnic studies, you know, visual arts, ethnic studies, like many different courses, so that the kids are going to get it in multiple ways. And we gave ourselves about 3 years to do it. And so we have like 2 years left to really saturate with the courses. So we have right now our committees creating like 10 courses, awesome. 10 lines, right? So, but you know, myself and our president, he's a Chicana studies professor at Cal State Long Beach. We know ethnic studies, right? So we can, you know, make sure things are done well. But in other districts, you might have board members that don't know what it is, or, you know, staff that doesn't. And so and the community knows it, but then they don't invite the community. So it's hard. Yeah.
So typical. That happens all the time. And, you know, ethnic studies oftentimes gets co-opted by folks who think they know what it is, and they really don't. And I'm gonna ask you, Carolyn, just 2 quick questions. If there are any last words that you want to share with these amazing students about, you know, in case they're ever interested in possibly running for public office, even though it's a challenge, maybe some words of encouragement. And then also the second part is if there are any things that you could use help with, because students also have to complete agents of change activities for this class. And if you need help that students might be able to participate and help you with, you know, you can put your contact info in the chat. And that's a total option. If you can use some help and you know of something that you can have them work on with you or for you, then I bet. So yeah, just any last words.
So yeah, I mean, I do not like to romanticize running for office. It is hard. You will be torn. If you are in a romantic relationship, that's a struggle. So that's rough. It's rough because there's so much of yourself that is just torn out of you. Just be aware of that. And if you're going to run or you have aspirations to run, to make sure you have a base in the community. If you are like an activist in name, but you really don't have a reputation in the community, and you haven't been doing any base building in the community, and you haven't been visible and people don't know you, it's going to be really hard to get the people that you need to support and put in the time and labor. The people that supported me were people that have known me for a long time and know like my record, folks that never have walked for anybody, like walked for me because I have a reputation way prior to this, right? And so just know that you know the community will stand behind you if you've been standing behind the community, but they will also keep you accountable. So you have to, it's rough. In terms of stuff that you can help me with, it's not really related to school board, but right now in Santa Ana, they're trying to get rid of the handball courts, which we know is like this Chicana like whole thing, right? And so I've been trying to do some preliminary research of like how the handball courts have slowly gotten taken away, and if there's been any other kind of papers written on like how this, you know, how this is, what the racist undertones are to this kind of policies, even though our board is completely a board of color, or I mean, our city council, and it has been for at least a decade. I haven't had the time to research, right? I'm busy, and I'm like, I don't have time. So those are things that are like super helpful because that's gonna set the tone, because the city's gonna be doing its park plans. And a lot of times these handball courts are they just disappear. There's a handball court in a community that existed they built it themselves because the city wouldn't built it. They built it decades ago. They bought the concrete and built it themselves, and they took it down without telling folks. Because some folks in the community wanted it taken away, but majority didn't, because they said homelessness, gangs, drugs, right? And so like those kinds of things are helpful. Those research, like the background history is super helpful when you can't be on the ground, but you're giving like the research to help folks articulate what's happening to the public, right? So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good project to work on. So if anyone is interested in that, please reach out to Carolyn, and I'm just going to ask you to go ahead and put your contact information in the chat for students to reach out to you. But thank you, Hermana, for being here with us. Thank you for being in the struggle for as many years as you have, and for being dedicated and keeping it real, staying real, because it's hard. So, you know, just sending out the best of vibes to you, girl. And thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for visiting us. You're welcome to stay with us if you'd like to, as I welcome Jorge and have him share his story with us as well. But muchísimas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next guest speaker, who is Jorge Pacheco Jr. And he was born and raised in San Jose, California, and has been an elementary and middle school teacher in the Bay Area since graduating from UC Berkeley in 2013. As an ethnic studies teacher and activist, he is passionate about decolonizing schooling and bringing Indigenous values into education and curriculum. Jorge is also the president for both the California Latino School Boards Association and the Oak Grove School District Board of Education. Jorge, welcome, hermano. How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, hermana. Nice to be here. And hi, everybody. Nice to meet all of you. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here with you all.
So just to kind of help get you started, same questions that I asked Carolyn is, you know, what is it like to be a Chicano elected official, and why you decided to run for office, and also what issues are you currently addressing?
To be a Chicano elected leader it's interesting. It's filled with contradictions. The first is that we know historically that the education system has not been there to support our community, and in many ways has done a lot to silence us, to hide our histories, to continue the systems of oppression that have oftentimes, and it almost did to me, robbed many people of their opportunities for a future, robbed them opportunities to even know who they are. it robs people of their voices. That's what schooling is in the United States historically. And so now to be an elected leader and to have that type of consciousness, it means that you're part of the same system that exists to oppress these populations. And so how do you reconcile that? How do you create policies and be the living, breathing part of the system that at the same time you're also trying to reform and in many ways dismantle and completely change from up to down? And so to be a Chicano elected leader, it means to have that perspective for example, for me, like, I do not hide the awkward truth for my district. And I live and serve in the same district that I was born and raised and taught in. But at every single meeting I go to, at every single opportunity that I have, I tell people that do not call me a success story of this district. I am not here because I was taught math and science and reading and etc. I wasn't taught any of that in this district. In fact, when I went to community college, after barely graduating high school, I had to spend hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars to try to learn all of the curriculum that I wasn't taught in my K through 12 experience. And that's just at the material level. When I tell people that at the psychological level, at the self-esteem level, to undo those messages that I wasn't stupid, that I was worthy of academics, that I was worthy of education, these are things that take years and years and years to undo because of the trauma that schooling does to a lot of people like probably you, definitely me. And so at every single turn that I have, at every single opportunity that I have, I give my story and I tell people that very awkward truth, like, I am not a success story of this district, but I am here because of the thousands of kids that have not passed our schools with success. And I'm here to help make that, to reverse some of those trends. And so that nobody really claps for things like that when I say things like that, but everybody understands, like, okay, this is not, we can't just, it's not just, it's not just the same. It's not, how do I say the right term? It's not business as usual when it comes to people like us in these seats now making the decisions, asking the questions, and making the directives to make things go in the way that we need. So that's how I approach this conundrum of being completely disserviced from the same system that I am now leading. And so it's a really fascinating and awkward, existence.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking like Nepantla right there, right? Like you're walking between these two realities. And so, yeah, that's definitely ironic and a struggle, but an important one at that. And then also, if you can just speak to some of the issues that you're currently addressing.
Mm-hmm. So two of the biggest issues I'm addressing include, three. I would say number one, well, actually four. I'm president of my board, which means I'm literally leading our district through a global pandemic, through a situation that no school district has ever experienced in living history, in living memory, at least in living memory. And number two, we are dealing with reopening. We are dealing with how to keep people safe. And we are specifically trying to figure out how do we make our communities of color who have been impacted by COVID more than anybody else, how do we make them feel safe when it's time for them to return back to our schools, if they even ever want to. And if they never want to go back to our schools, if they want to stay in distance learning, for example, all of next year, how do we make that system right for them? Because the truth is, distance learning isn't working for everybody, but it is working for some kids. So how do we reimagine education like it's never been done before? That's one of the things that we're dealing with right now. A second thing is we are the first district in California to have created a K-8 ethnic studies program. And so we are currently trying to build an entire program that is going to be teaching kids about race, class, and gender and histories of indigenous peoples, API, Latinx, Black, etc., as young as TK, all the way up to 8th grade. And we're going to try to create an entire something that's never been done before. Not in a district-wide format for the ages as young as this. So we've already started that process. We are currently working with a bunch of other districts and our county office of education to make this happen. Another thing that we're working on is also digital broadband. We know that when education shifted to online formats, it was broadband speeds that were it was the new apartheid system, keeping certain kids in class and certain kids out. And the question is, how do we bridge those communities together? How do we make access for populations that have traditionally not had digital literacy, so they don't really know how to use computers, let alone access computers and broadband. And then number two, give them the speed necessary for them to Zoom and to have virtual learning happen at the exact same time as probably a lot of their siblings in the same household, and parents too. So we are currently working on advocating for legislation to get high-speed broadband as a public utility. I believe that broadband should be something that flows just like water, just like electricity. It needs to be seen in that same way. High-speed broadband is a human right. And then of course, and then my last issue that I'm working on is expanding diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging efforts to create anti-racist projects and programs and events and policies at the district level. So we just created a whole district-wide diversity, inclusion, belonging committee designed to do just that. It has 60 people in it, sometimes more. We break it down to subcommittees, and everybody's super excited about just doing some really radical, progressive, anti-racist work. And of course, it's attracting a lot of attention from the racists in the community. They're saying we should not talk about white supremacy. White supremacy in of itself is racist. They're saying things like, why do we have to, anti-racist isn't real, or that racism is dead. They're saying, and of course, we're getting people that are claiming that I'm racist against white people because of the things that we're trying to bring in. And so, you know, and of course, at the county level, they are organizing deep. We've just created the first county-wide ethnic studies program, an initiative to train all of our 32 districts in ethnic studies implementation. And of course, what do we see? We see the conservatives saying that we're trying to implement communism. Whether we're trying to bring in folks that are saying we're trying to, you know, get all the students to hate white kids, and that's not it at all. I've been teaching white kids since I became an ethnic studies elementary and middle school teacher myself 8 years ago. And the one thing that I know is that they always said that ethnic studies is their favorite class, and that they've always valued the most when they learned about the struggles of others, and even more so when they found out how even white people themselves have always been partners in helping resistance movements. We can't forget how a lot of their populations have been there with our Black brothers and sisters, getting sprayed down and maced and fought right next to them since the beginning of time. We see that every time that we are in the streets with them. And so, and that's what ethnic studies does. It makes everybody aware of how we are all needed in this battle of against white supremacy. But at the same time, because white supremacy is an invention from the white community historically since 1492 in the Americas, how it is now incumbent upon all of us, especially white people, to undo it. And so the question is, how do we get everybody to understand that basic question without feeling like they're being attacked? And that's why ethnic studies is essential. You can't have those conversations without having ethnic studies. So that's what we're trying to work on at the local and county and statewide level. That's all you're doing? Just kidding. Those are major things that you're doing. Very much appreciated all these efforts. They're huge, Jorge, and this is it is a challenge, you know, and all of us that work in the ethnic studies world, you know, Carolyn included, and yourself, myself, and, you know, I think that's the biggest challenge that we come up across is like this misconception of ethnic studies and how it teaches reverse racism as if that can actually be real, and it teaches to hate white folks, and it is not about that. But we do have to have the courage to confront the white supremacy of which this country was built upon. That it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of heart
it takes a lot of heart, it takes a lot of humanity. And in order for us to come to terms with that and move forward, not only does it restore the humanity of BIPOC communities, but it also restores the humanity of the white community. Because we all have to do this together. We definitely all have to do this together. And so that's always a challenge, because there are a lot of feelings that are hurt. There's a lot of white guilt. There's a lot of all of these things, right? And we're supposed to resolve all those things for them. And it's like, nah, y'all, like y'all gotta resolve some things on your own and then come back to the table and let's resolve the rest of this together. So it does take a lot of work. So I commend you for the work that you're doing. I'm glad that you're still a young buck, because that takes a lot of energy. And so I'm glad that you're doing all of the things that you're doing. He covered a whole lot, folks. So are there any questions or anything that you want to touch back on as far as the great topics that he shared with us? Not everyone at once, y'all. Share the mic. There is, I did have a question for you. So as far as the role that you're playing, and how are things going with your colleagues on the board? Are they as committed to this? Are they supportive? Has it been like a tug of war, or are you all moving forward in unison? Like how's that going for you, especially being the president of the board? Like how's that going for you?
So that's a great question. When I first got elected 3 years ago, it was an uphill battle. I was the first Latinx person elected to my board, first queer person, first indigenous person, second API, I'm part Korean too. And it was majority white, and it was just me and a black veteran trustee who were part of the 5-member board. And for the longest time, and never in the board's history has it ever had a majority of color. And so it was a lot of pressure to not only break those glass barriers when I did, but also try to advocate for the efforts and the policies that I wanted to, anti-racist policies, to create these committees, to implement ethnic studies, to do that as a person that everyone looked at me and thought, stupid person. Like, one, like young, or two, like, they come in with their stereotypes about Latinx people or people with like accents or etc. I had to really fight hard for respect like I never did before. I've been fighting for respect my entire life, but I really had to fight hard for it, even harder in that space, which is a space that has never seen a person like me sit in that seat before. And so it took an entire year of making public statements and talking and organizing and building relationships until finally in December, a year later, a full year since getting elected, when I passed my resolutions and policies to create ethnic studies committees and diversity and inclusion belonging committees as well. It took a full year for that to happen. And the entire time, it was nothing but uphill battle and people saying, wait, or it's not time, or saying like, oh, this is like, you gotta like, just wait a few more months, et cetera, like there's no money. And all of that was, and forgive my language, just bullshit. Always bullshit. And the one thing that I really valued about becoming a politician was building that new skill of smelling bullshit as fast as possible, calling it out and holding people accountable to it when necessary. Because the moment I started to learn that, oh, wait a minute, they're only telling me to wait. They're only telling me that there's no money for this, and they're only telling me that it's not time yet. Then I started to learn that, no, I'm going to partner with the teachers union. I'm going to partner with these trustee, with our Black trustee. I'm going to partner with A, B, and C, all these communities, these parent communities. And then boom, all of a sudden I have coalitions behind me. And then I started to see my legislation pass, my resolutions and policies pass. And then of course, by the time I got elected president, we had a brand new board. I was the first Latinx person. Then 2 years later, as of last December, we have now become a board of majority women, majority of color, majority Latinx, majority queer, and majority millennial, and majority teacher. So this board has completely it's a brand new board, a completely new identity. Everybody's excited and a little scared, but excited. And so now we have a board that is fully on board because when people break that glass ceilings, more people follow. More people see that it is possible for them to do it. Because when I ran, I was living paycheck to paycheck. I was still sleeping on the couch of my parents as a teacher in San Jose, one of the most expensive cities in the whole country. And of course it was, in those types of situations, it's not a surprise, but it's those types of perspectives that need to be making the policies, because it's always rich homeowners that are always on these school boards that always have the time and funds to campaign and end up on these seats to begin with. And so I think for me, like destroying that imposter syndrome, which I'm still dealing with, destroying that imposter syndrome, that little voice that always said, it's not my time, I'm too poor, or I'm too brown, or there's never, just wait for another Latinx person to get there, or A, B, and C. After learning that, the person I was running up against was a person that was in office for 24 years. They got in office since with the day that I got in kindergarten. I said, hell no, that's all I needed to know. I may be poor and I may be a teacher, but I'm definitely gonna run for this seat and take that seat away to be that first person so others can follow. And lo and behold, it happened 2 years later. So those are just some of my own experiences and how I dealt with the imposter syndrome that was really holding me back for many years, and which is holding a lot of us back, I think, from making those risky choices that will benefit many others in the future.
Thank you for that. Just because you said all of that, I do want to ask you, do you have future plans to continue on this political path, or do you plan on staying rooted in education as you are now?
I am definitely staying rooted in education, and I'm going to stay in school board, but I am hoping to run for assembly when the time is right. And so I want to end up in the state legislature, because I can't make education policy at the city level or at the county level. So I'm going to hope that, I'm going to just keep doing what I'm doing, organizing and being part of the community. And then eventually I'm going to try my best to become an assembly member, or maybe even a senator one day, to continue making that education policy. My hope is that when I'm in the state legislature, I'm going to introduce legislation that will create ethnic studies K-8 programs across every single district in this state, and also train ethnic studies teachers with credentialing as well.
Beautiful, beautiful plans. And as Carolyn, mentioned during her presentation to us, is that it's important to show the community that you're putting in the work, right? That people see what you're about, and that you're building your base as you move along, and that you're keeping it real, so that when it comes to the time where you're going to run for a certain elected seat, that you have the backing of the community and they know what you're truly about. And so that's very important. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to switch over to, let me see, was it Jasmine? Jasmine, you have a question? Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, so I actually put it in the chat just right when you were talking, but
Okay.
I can read it out loud.
Yes.
I put, for beginners, what do you recommend to get themselves into politics and like city council, like following it, understanding it, and such?
Two things. The first would be to watch city council meetings. They can be really boring, but at the very least, after even watching just one meeting, you will quickly understand what are the priorities of that local governance team. Number two, I would reach out to the city council members themselves and tell them that, hey, I've been watching your meetings and I'm really inspired by what you're doing. And I would really like to learn about some volunteering opportunities, some internship opportunities. I'm really hopeful, I'm really interested in A, B, and C. What can we do? And then email them over and over and over again until they respond. They eventually will respond. But I think that would be a really great way to just get involved and to get your foot in the door with local politics. I trusting when I say that they are always interested in getting people that are interested in them. If you take your time and to email them, they are already impressed, because believe it or not many kids or youth or young adults take the chance to do that to begin with. And so I think that's just one of the really great ways of doing that. And that's also a really strong way of getting yourself streamlined into an eventual employment opportunity. They always like to use their former interns or volunteers or folks that they have been seeing in their meetings into fast track opportunities for entry level policy positions. So those are just some tips that I hope will be helpful.
And just to add to that, folks, like, don't be afraid to reach out to your city council members or to your school board members. Don't be afraid. You are their constituents, right? They answer to you. And it could be a little bit intimidating if you've never done it before, but it gets easier every time you do it. It gets easier. So it gets easier to call in or to show up to those meetings and use up the 3 minutes up at the podium and say what you got to say. It might be like super stressful the first time, but every time it gets easier and easier, and you have to do it. And then you're going to end up asking yourself, like, why didn't I do this before? Like, more people need to do this. We need to hold them accountable. We need to be asking them the questions. We need to let them know that we're watching, that we're listening. So don't be afraid to do that. They're just people. And even though they have these positions, they aren't any better or higher than you are. Just always know that you are their constituents and they answer to you. And they're only going to answer to you if you make them. If you're out of sight, you're out of mind. They're not even going to worry about you, think about you, or know that you exist, or know that somebody is watching them, right? So just build up to that and don't be afraid. Jump in and do it. Are there any other questions or comments for Jorge?
You said that you might be helping people become like ethnic studies teachers. I was wondering what some of the credentials are and like what way to go towards that path.
There is one program that I would recommend, and that's the San Jose State University Ethnic Studies program. They actually have a teacher credentialing program specifically for ethnic studies teacher at the K through 12 level. And so if you are interested in that, I'm going to actually put my email right here, and I'm going to connect you to that coordinator, who is one of my mentors. His name is Professor Marcos Pizarro. He's an amazing person, and he is the one that manages and helps with that program. So send me an email if that program is interest to anybody, and I'd be happy to. And he'd be a great resource to help you connect to other ethnic studies credentialing programs or teacher education programs in your own local area as well, in case that San Jose is not too accessible.
That's dope. If that's the same Professor Marcos Pizarro that was at UCSB for a time, I know him, and I took a class with him way back. And in fact, students were organizing. We had El Congreso at UCSB. We didn't have Mecha back in the day. And we organized to make sure that he got hired at UCSB. So I hope that's him. If it is, tell him I say hello. And so other questions, comments, that's great that San Jose is doing that. I'm so glad. And if that's him, then, oh, beautiful, beautiful. Other questions, comments? Jessica, go ahead and share.
So I did want to listening to your story. I was just more than inspired, and I just wanted to ask how often do you take the time to give yourself a break, care about your own mental health?
That is an awesome question. I actually deal with anxiety. I take medication for that, and to be honest with you, I've had anxiety issues my entire life, and I only recently diagnosed it as early as last August. And so for my entire life, I've just been existing with anxiety, and it even blurred the lines between knowing what is really my personality and what isn't. For example, my drive to always have things organized, or to be like a overachiever in certain areas, or why I would just ruminate and over again about particular conversations or things that happen, or etc. So obviously, a lot of these things have caused me a lot of stress over the years. And so something that I've decided to do ever since I came to terms with this all is that I accept reality that sometimes I'm gonna have at least 1 week where it's gonna be an 80-hour work week, and that's hard. But if there's gonna be one 80-hour work week, and that's typically the week that I have school board meetings and teaching full time and I'm also just running a bunch of other things. For every other week in that month, I do not touch those Saturdays and Sundays. I do not touch it with work. That is only for partner time or myself time or family time or anything like that. But I make sure that I designate sacred time and then sacrifice other times. So I know that given the existence, like the reality of my own life, I can't isolate all of my weekends away like that. So I have to make sure that I am purposeful by saying, on these weekends, I'm free, and after 5 o'clock, I'm doing nothing other than just like watching TV or reading a book or just going out and getting something to eat. And so I have to, and so it's funny because the key to powerful relationships in any relationship that you have, whether they're romantic or not, is strong communication and boundaries. Boundaries are ways that you help others love you. And so you need to also give yourself boundaries for yourself. Oftentimes people with anxiety, you break your own boundaries over and over and over again. And so in order to show yourself love, you have to make sure to put those boundaries in place. And so for me, making sure that the boundaries are around work and around my own time and around, and I have to make sure that I don't break those. And so that's how I've been keeping my mental health safe and healthy. I've not been perfect. I've just had an anxiety episode over the weekend. But everyone gets better with time, and always asking for help is essential for that as well. And so that's what I try to do. I always ask for help from everybody around me and ask for space when I need.
That resonates so much, so much. And I think that a lot of us that come from hardship and come from traumatic experiences, and a lot of us, just being BIPOC, trying to survive in this society, unknowingly suffer from anxiety. And a lot of people, whether they're BIPOC or not, unknowingly suffer from anxiety because it's a stressful world to live in. But then we have these added layers, right, of having to, and I think it's even, the saying is ignorance is bliss. And when you're not ignorant and you're very aware and critical of what's going on around you, then we have this like racial exhaustion, that level of it. Then we have this other level of it and this other level of it of being, activists and organizers and fighting for social change. And so there's so many layers that build up anxiety, and that's real. And there's, activist fatigue, and there are all these things that are very real. So that's a really great question, because I think that now I'm hearing it more now than before, is that a lot of us folks are being very cognizant and intentional about dealing with those types of things, because if not, we burn out and we're not doing any good to anyone. And that kind of comes back to, the indigenous philosophy of the 4 circles, right? Like your first circle is you, and you have to make sure that you're doing well and that you're okay and that you're balanced. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to help that second circle, which is your family, your loved ones, or that next circle, which is your immediate community, and that larger circle, which is the larger society that we live in. We're not going to do anyone any good. So we do have to be intentional and mindful about taking that time for ourselves so that there's balance. Okay. And I'm sure that you as students are dealing with a lot of things. So be intentional with that time for yourself. And we only have a couple minutes left, Jorge, but I want to offer you the same opportunity as I offered Carolyn, in that if there are any, and I'm sure there are many, but if things come to mind, if anything comes to mind right now, which you feel students could help you with, because students do have to participate in agents of change activities. And so kind of getting involved in the community and helping to create change in society. So if there's anything that you feel students could help you with, you could just put your contact information in the chat and they can reach out to you and maybe talk to us a little bit about what you might need help with.
Absolutely. There's definitely opportunities to help with. For example, I'm with my organization, the California Latino School Boards Association. We create programs and events for the Latinx community across the entire state. And we are the organization that exclusively represents the 55% that is Latinx student population in public schools of California. So if you are interested in legislation, in membership outreach, if you're interested in event organizing, or even just attending some of our events that are going to happen in the future, send me an email and I'd be happy to link you into some of our activities and meetings, and we can help, and then you can help us with anything that you would like to do. So that's if you want to get involved at the statewide level to organize a Latinx community with our school board association. And you'll be working directly with school board leaders, elected leaders, and legislators from across the state. So if that's something that's interesting to you, please reach out, and my email is in the chat.
All right, y'all got that? Y'all see that in the chat? So make sure you're reaching out to folks so that you can get your hands on some cool projects here, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and invite you all to unmute so that you can give your thanks and your goodbyes to both of our guest speakers. Thank you again, Carolyn and Jorge, for being with us. Thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you for all of the hard and good work that you're doing in our communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.